Thanks, Andrew. So I really am going to lower the emotional temperature right now, just for a moment. Then you get Andrew back again. But just in the meantime, on the plus side, there is a provisional agreement about the rights of EU citizens to stay in the UK. And it is not final because nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And as Olivia was saying, there is a lot to be agreed, like Northern Ireland, before we get a final agreement. But there is an agreement in principle about what will happen to EU citizens living in the UK. And that agreement was reached in December last year. So what's been agreed? Well, EU citizens living in the UK before Brexit date, so 29th of March next year, will be allowed to stay. But you will need to apply for a new status. Now, the British government has said that it will introduce the new system later this year. In late 2018, there'll be a new system. It will be a voluntary system at first. And they'll be introducing it in stages. It will be voluntary to start with. Now, the final deadline will be at least 2 years after Brexit date. Now, so it will be at least March 2021 will be the final deadline for applying for this new status. It may well be a lot longer than that, actually. The EU has been arguing in the draft withdrawal agreement that it should be even 2 years after that. And obviously today, I don't know if you've heard, I've been in here, but there has been a provisional agreement on the transition period. So it was going to be that there'd be different rules for people arriving in the transition period. So that's after Brexit date, but before the end of 2020. But now it turns out that they will have the same rights. So all those people will also be applying for the same status, and they're going to have time to do that. So we don't quite know when the final deadline will be, but it's not going to be immediately. So you don't have to do anything right now. So what about this new status? What about this new system that's going to be introduced? The government says it will be simple and straightforward. And it has to be simple and straightforward. Well, I'll tell you about the good parts first, and then the catches. So the good part is that the government is going to try and automate the thing, because of course there's vast numbers. The current system couldn't possibly cope with 3 million applications. So they're going to try and automate the thing. Now, what they're going to try to do, what they've said, this hasn't been published yet, but what they've said face-to-face, is there will be an app. So it's going to be entirely online. It will be on your phone or on your computer, and there will be 3 checks to get through. So the first one is nationality. Are you an EU citizen? And so you'll have your app on your phone, and you will upload a photo of your passport or identity card. Then we'll ask you, how long have you lived in the UK? And finally, do you have a criminal record? Now, supposedly, those are the 3 questions. And then the answers that you give will be checked against other government departments, so HMRC, your tax records and police records. And then supposedly, if it all checks out, and according to your tax records, for instance, it says, oh yes, this person's been here for at least 5 years, you will get settled status. So settled status is the new equivalent of permanent residence, which is a status which already exists under EU law. And if it turns out that you've been here for less than 2 years, so less than 5 years, you will get a temporary status. So a temporary status, or pre-settled status. And the idea is once you've clocked up your 5 years, then you'll be able to convert that into a settled status. Now, the catch is, so for some people, the idea is that most people will sail through this because they've been working here for 5 years, they don't have a criminal record, it's very straightforward. So 2 weeks later, they get a message saying, yep, you've got your settled status. The problem is, of course, when you make things very simple, some people's lives are not so simple. So some people are here, and they haven't been working for 5 years for all sorts of reasons. So then, presumably, this system will say, oh yes, well, in your case, we need some more information. But we just don't know how that's going to work. What information will they want? What tests are they going to apply? We just don't know that yet. The government said it will cost less than a British passport, which right now is £72.50. It's about to go up, but that's what it is at the moment. If you already have a permanent residence document, so that's a document issued now under EU law, then it will be free to swap it for this new settled status. Now, one really important point here is that the immigration minister, the current minister and the previous minister, the immigration minister has said that they're not going to care what you've been doing over this 5-year period, or if it's less than 5 years, all you have to do is show you've been living here. That's what they're saying. So we haven't had any of the precise details, but so the immigration minister said, we're not going to apply any tests about whether they've been working and exercising their treaty rights. So treaty rights meaning exercising a right under EU law. It literally is just if they can demonstrate residency. So that's what the government's saying. Now, we haven't seen exactly how this works, but that's what they're saying. And I'll explain why that's important. So look, we do have questions about this thing. So it sounds, if it's as simple as that, well, that sounds good. But look, we still don't know exactly how this will work. So we've been told about this. The government has told people face to face. The Home Office said, this is what we're planning to do. Various different people have met them. This is a plan. But they haven't actually published details of this new system. So we don't know how it will work. And we don't know how it will work for people whose lives are a bit, not quite as straightforward and haven't got their tax records all straight because they haven't been working or whatever. One of the particular issues, what about people living outside the UK? Now, the government says you will be able to apply outside the UK. But one particular thing is that, so at the moment, under EU law, if you've been living here for 5 years, depending what you've been doing, but you may acquire permanent residence automatically under EU law. So some people have been living here, working here, maybe they clocked up their 5 years a couple of years ago, but they're outside the UK at the moment. They pop back every now and then, but they've got their permanent residence. Can those people apply for settled status? We just don't know. We don't have answers to that. Part of the reason is we haven't had any input into this. The government is very keen to keep lawyers away from the development of this process. So we can't ask them these difficult questions. So maybe they're going to present us with something they've already decided. Another point is that permanent residence, the EU status, the EU law status, is automatic. You get it automatically after 5 years. Now, this settled status, as we mentioned in the last panel, is something you have to apply for. So can you get that backdated and say, well, look, I've been here for 30 years. I acquired permanent residence many years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was. Can you get the settled status backdated? We just don't know about that. One really important thing is that the withdrawal agreement, the draft withdrawal agreement that the EU has written, now, it only covers EU citizens living in the UK in accordance with EU law. Now, that matters because under EU law, you acquire permanent residence. You have a right of residence, you acquire permanent residence, only if you fit into certain categories. So you need to be working or self-employed, self-sufficient or a student. Now, if you're not working, under EU law, you have to have this comprehensive sickness insurance, which the UK, in practice, the UK government interprets as meaning you have to have private health insurance. So that's extremely controversial. A lot of people disagree with the UK's interpretation, but that's what they're insisting on. So now the UK has said, for this settled status, we're not going to worry about comprehensive sickness insurance. Never mind that issue. We don't care what you've been doing. You're just going to have to show you're living here. So if you haven't been working, don't worry about the comprehensive sickness insurance. But that is not going to be nailed down in the withdrawal agreement. That the EU is sticking to EU law. The British government said, it's fine, it'll be okay. But that's a unilateral assurance from the British government. And, so maybe in a year or two, they might say, you know what, that thing we said about comprehensive sickness insurance, we're not so sure now. So we just don't know. So it's very unsettling. And of course, what happens if there is no agreement? Nothing is agreed, nothing is agreed. What if we do crash out and there is no withdrawal agreement? Then all of this stuff is off the table. Now, the Home Office say, when you talk to them in person, they say, look, we're going to do this anyway. We've got to have an agreement at some point. So we are going to be granting settled status to people who apply. But they haven't guaranteed that in writing. They haven't promised that in writing. They're just saying that. So, are they going to do this? I don't know. How much do you trust the British government on this? So right. So there are a lot of questions still to be answered. If it does, in case we do crash out and there's no agreement, it would be good to have some kind of evidence of your status here, the fact that you've been living here lawfully or living here at all. So what can you do if you want to get some kind of document about your status here? So the current system we have under EU law, as part of the EU, what happens is that after 5 years in the UK, living in the UK, you acquire permanent residence. And as I mentioned, that's something you acquire automatically. You don't have to apply for any documents. Getting a document doesn't give you any extra rights. All it is the government saying, yes, we agree, you have those rights, which you've already got. Now, it's become a lot more straightforward. There's this famous 85-page form, this paper form, which is still there. They keep talking about revising it. It's still there. Most people can apply online now. There are a few categories of people who can't, but most people can apply online. The online application is pretty straightforward. So you have to show that you've done your 5 years. You apply online. You can use the European Passport Return Service if you don't want to send your identity card or your passport off to the Home Office. So you apply online, then you go to a council, a local council, take your stuff there. They will copy your passport and then hand your passport back and then send everything off to the Home Office. And it's pretty quick at the moment. I mean, for most cases, they're coming in under a month at the moment. You know, we had one that just came back in a week and a half. So if it's complicated, it will take longer. Can't take more than 6 months, but it's pretty quick. But the huge catch here is this thing that if you're not working, you have to show comprehensive sickness insurance, and the British government interprets that as meaning effectively you almost always have to have private health insurance, which is a real problem for lots of people. Even though you're entitled to use the National Health Service, that's pretty comprehensive, but the British government says no, doesn't count. You can get it backdated effectively. So when you get your document, you get a letter with it, and if you show that you did your 5 years, so you completed your 5 years in 2016, the letter will say, we deem you to have acquired permanent residence on 1st of February 2016, or whatever it is. And that can be important because if you want to apply for British citizenship, then you have to show that you've had, in most cases, you have to show that you've had permanent residence for at least a year. So effectively, you can get it backdated. And as I mentioned, one of the problems with this settled status is, we don't know if you can get that one backdated. It costs £65. I know it's really annoying that it costs anything at all. It does cost £65, but by Home Office standards, that is an absolute bargain. Believe me, it really is. As Andrew will be explaining, if you deal with non-EU citizens, the fees are astronomical. I mean, many, many thousands, north of 10,000 often. They're hugely expensive. And if you have this, so if you have a permanent residence document, you will be able to convert it into settled status for free. So look, what do you do? Look, if you don't qualify for a permanent residence document, so for instance, you've got this issue, you haven't been working, but you don't have the comprehensive sickness insurance, you're going to have to wait for the new settled status. Wait and see what happens. But in the meantime, do keep evidence of your residence here. Do collect documents. At least have something. If you've got your gas bills, keep them. If you can find old council tax bills, just keep some kind of evidence of your residence here. If you do qualify for a permanent residence document, then I would suggest that you get one. I mean, it's not very expensive, and it could be converted into this settled status for free. And you don't really have a huge amount to lose. Now, if you do get one of those, and you can show that you acquired this status a year ago, or if you're married to a British citizen, you don't have to worry about that 1 year, then do think about applying for British citizenship. Now, I know that's a really emotional topic, and a lot of people think, why the hell should I apply for citizenship of a country which is treating us like this? And I get that completely. And it's also extremely expensive, that bit, because that's not controlled by EU law. So Britain charges huge fees, and it's well over £1,000. So a lot of people can't do that. But if you can, think about it, because for one thing, that guarantees your right to stay. Brexit, no Brexit, you're here. The other thing is, if you become a British citizen, you will get the vote. You will be able to vote in general elections. And if you live here, a lot of people live here for many years. It's right that you have a say in what happens in this country. And if you become a British citizen, then in most cases, you don't have to give up your existing other EU citizenship. It depends on the country, but most countries allow dual nationality. You will have a say in what happens here. Maybe there will be another referendum or a people's poll. There will be general elections, so you'll have a voice. So just consider that. Just one last point here, one technical thing. People often ask about children born in the UK. So people move here, they have children here, they wonder about their children's status. It's really complicated, but the basic rule is, if you have a child who was born in the UK to an EU citizen before October 2000, then if you are working here or self-employed or self-sufficient with the comprehensive insurance, that child is British. They're British, that's it. Even if they're grown up now, that child is British and get a British passport. But between October 2000 and April 2006, then in most cases that child is not a British citizen. But if you have since acquired permanent residence, even if you didn't bother getting the card, you can register the child as a British citizen. And children born since the 30th of April 2006, if you did your 5 years and got your permanent residence before then, even without the document, then that child, if you got your permanent residence, you completed the 5 years before the child was born, that child is a British citizen. And just finally, children born in the UK who spend 10 years in the UK, those children can be registered as British, never mind what the status of their parents. So that's just a sort of little snapshot of what the rules are. That's the legal bit about staying. I'm going to just pass on to Andrew now, who's going to talk about the bigger picture here and what's really at stake.